When justice is judged, every courtroom has its rituals. Metal detectors, badge scans, uniformed guards, and long hallways echoing with the footsteps of justice. But what happens when the very system meant to protect fairness and dignity is the first to deny it? This story isn't just about a mistake at the courthouse door. It's about what unfolds when assumption meets silence, and silence meets purpose. It's about a woman who didn't need to raise her voice to raise a mirror to an entire institution. It begins on a quiet morning in downtown Atlanta with a woman walking up the courthouse steps, confident, composed, and unknowingly about to be tested. The story ends where it starts, with a woman standing outside justice. But by the time we finish, she's not the one being judged. The woman who walked with purpose. It was just past 8:00 a.m. when she appeared, walking through the low, hanging fog that hugged the streets of downtown Atlanta like a secret. Her heels clicked against the courthouse pavement, not hurried, not hesitant, just confident. People took notice, not because she was flashy, but because she carried herself like someone who belonged in a room people usually had to earn their way into. She was tall, with deep brown skin that glowed against the contrast of her tailored navy suit. Her briefcase was sleek, her posture perfect. Her hair was pulled back in a neat chignon, and her eyes, sharp, focused, looked straight ahead, not down, not around. She wasn't there to ask for permission. She was there to fulfill a purpose. As she climbed the steps of the Fulton County Courthouse, a few heads turned. Some assumed she was a high-powered attorney. Others weren't sure what to make of her, but they all could feel it. She wasn't ordinary. There was a quiet authority in her presence that didn't require announcement. But just as she reached the entrance, her stride came to an unexpected halt. Assumptions at the door. "Excuse me, ma'am, hold up." The words came from Officer Brad Connolly, stationed by the courthouse door in a faded uniform and an attitude worn by years of unchecked control. He didn't ask who she was. Didn't wonder why she was there. He just saw what he thought he needed to see, and judged the rest. His tone was flat, bored, but it carried the weight of dismissal. "Visitors need to wait outside," he said, nodding toward a rope-tough area at the base of the steps. "You can't come in until your name is called." The woman paused, barely tilting her head. "I'm not a visitor." Connolly didn't budge. "Doesn't matter. You still need to wait. No exceptions." There was no scene. No raised voice, no argument, just a brief flicker of disbelief in the woman's eyes. Like she'd seen this before too many times, and yet she remained calm, composed, understood, she said quietly, stepping back down the marble stairs. People watched, no one interfered. The woman stood in silence just outside the doors of justice, waiting not because she lacked authority, but because someone failed to recognize it. And in that moment, the courthouse didn't realize it had made its biggest mistake of the day. Not by what it allowed in, but by who it left standing outside. The silence that spoke volumes. She didn't pace, she didn't protest, she simply stood, still, dignified, outside the courthouse like a sentinel of patience. Every few seconds, someone glanced her way. Courthouse staff, lawyers brushing past in tailored suits, a pair of interns whispering behind a file folder. Her presence was like a stone dropped in still water. It caused quiet ripples of curiosity. What kind of person dressed like that just waits without question? The wind tugged gently at the hem of her blazer, but she didn't flinch. Her eyes remained fixed on the courthouse doors, her hands calmly clasped in front of her briefcase. There was no phone in hand, no sign of frustration, only presence, powerful, deliberate presence. She was a mystery to everyone who passed her, and yet none of them asked, none dared to challenge the officer's orders. She had been mislabeled, misjudged, and placed outside the temple of justice, but she wasn't there for attention. She was waiting for the right moment. When the right eyes finally noticed, Deputy Chief Justice Linda Morales was known for her timing. Never late, never early, always perfectly punctual. But the moment she stepped through the lobby doors, something broke her rhythm. Her eyes, sharp as ever, caught the image of the woman through the glass, standing alone, perfectly composed, outside the courthouse where she so clearly belonged inside. Morales froze mid-step. "Who is that woman standing on the steps?" she asked the clerk beside her. The young man looked up from his clipboard, confused. "I'm not sure, ma'am. Officer Connolly said she was just a visitor." Morales's eyes narrowed. "Just a visitor," she repeated, her voice dipped in disbelief. Without another word, she turned and marched back toward the doors, her heels echoing off the marble floor like thunder. Connolly saw her coming and stiffened. Before he could offer an explanation, Morales gestured past him. "She's not supposed to be out here," Morales said sharply. Then, turning to the woman, her voice softened with recognition, "Judge Parker, my sincerest apologies. Please, come inside." And in that moment, everything began to shift. A walk through shifting air, the tension inside the courthouse shifted the moment Deputy Chief Justice Morales opened the door for Judge Parker. The murmurs began instantly, soft at first, then swelling like a growing wave. Who was she? Why was Morales, of all people, escorting her inside with such urgency and respect? Every footstep echoed like a warning bell. As Judge Parker ascended the marble stairs for the second time, this time beside Morales, officers stood straighter, clerks paused mid-sentence, and attorneys leaned to whisper in confusion. Officer Connolly's face was a tapestry of disbelief and slowly dawning dread. People didn't know her name yet, but they could feel it. This woman was not ordinary. No one questioned her now, not even Connolly. Inside the building, doors opened with unspoken recognition. Morales led her down the hall like one might guide a general returning from war. And in a way, she was. This wasn't just a walk into court. It was a march into reckoning. The name that silenced the room, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Attorneys prepping notes, jurors adjusting their seats, and spectators shifting for a better view. It was a high-profile trial day, and everyone expected the usual, a powerful case, a seasoned judge, the usual drama. What they got was something entirely different. When the heavy wooden door opened, every head turned. And when Judge Parker entered, robed, calm, radiant with silent command, the room held its collective breath. She took her place at the bench, placed her briefcase beside her, and adjusted the mic. "I am Judge Celeste Parker," she said. Instant stillness, whispers died in throats, pens stopped mid-stroke, even the bailiff's expression melted into awe. Judge Parker, the federal appointee, the woman tasked with leading critical judicial reforms. The very name that had reshaped headlines, and just hours ago, she'd been left standing outside like she didn't belong. Now, seated at the very heart of the courtroom, she didn't have to raise her voice. Her presence alone said everything. The moment the room froze, the courtroom was no stranger to big names and bigger egos. But as Judge Parker sat beneath the seal of justice, a rare and reverent hush fell over the room. No gavel needed, no demand for order, just her presence and the weight it carried. Even those who hadn't recognized her before now understood. This was no ordinary judge. Her posture was regal, her eyes sharp, her demeanor firm but composed. She flipped through the docket without a word, but everyone in that courtroom was waiting for something, a reaction, an address, a reckoning. Then she looked up. Her gaze swept the room, not with contempt, but with clarity. Her eyes met those of Officer Connolly, who stood sheepishly near the door, his earlier arrogance now replaced by quiet panic. He had judged her by her skin, by her silence, by her refusal to shout. Now he was silent too. And the entire room followed suit, as if they sensed the air had shifted into something sacred. A voice that broke the system. Judge Parker leaned slightly forward, speaking into the mic, not loud, not theatrical, just deliberate. "This morning I was made to wait outside a building I was sworn to serve." She began, not because of a policy, not because of protocol, but because someone made a decision based on how I look rather than who I am. A tremor rippled through the benches. Lawyers exchanged glances. Jurors sat frozen. Connolly's eyes dropped to the floor. "I chose silence, not out of weakness, but out of purpose," she continued, "because sometimes silence reveals what words cannot." She didn't call names. She didn't point fingers, but everyone knew exactly what she meant. We cannot claim to uphold justice while practicing quiet prejudice at the door. Her voice was calm, but its echo was thunder. In that moment, the courtroom wasn't just a place for trials. It became a mirror, forcing everyone present to reflect not just on law, but on the bias that too often walks beside it. 1/2 consequences at the doorstep of justice. The aftermath was swift. Within hours of Judge Parker's statement, courthouse administrators convened an emergency meeting. Phones rang nonstop, emails buzzed like angry hornets. The courtroom transcript had already reached the Chief Justice's desk. Officer Connolly was relieved of duty pending investigation. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. For the first time in years, he looked small, like a man finally seeing the weight of the uniform he wore and how dangerously he had misused it. The courthouse was in shock, not because someone had been punished, but because it had taken so long. For years, behavior like his had been brushed aside as procedure, as standard screening, but Judge Parker's quiet defiance shattered that illusion. Her grace under pressure made one thing impossible to ignore: that justice isn't just what happens inside the courtroom, but how people are treated before they ever walk through its doors. A story that echoed across the nation. By the end of the day, the story had gone viral. Black female judge denied entry, delivers justice from the bench. She waited outside the court. Then the nation stood still. News anchors replayed her speech on loop. Social media was ablaze with outrage, admiration, and reflection. Civil rights leaders hailed her composure. Legal analysts dissected every word of her address. Students quoted her in debate teams. Activists held up signs that read, "Justice wears robes, not assumptions." But for Judge Parker, the headlines didn't matter. She hadn't done it for attention. She had done it because it was time. Her quiet stand had become a roaring movement. And across the country, in courtrooms large and small, officers and officials began looking a little closer, asking one more question before making one more assumption. Because sometimes the most powerful change doesn't come with a gavel. It comes from someone brave enough to simply wait. The verdict that changed more than one case. Judge Parker didn't need to sentence anyone to make her message heard. Her very presence, wrongly dismissed, then rightfully restored, became the loudest ruling that day. Connolly's suspension was only a symbol. The real sentence was served to a culture of assumptions, to a system too used to seeing power in one form and bias in another. In the days that followed, courthouses across the country reviewed entry protocols. Training sessions were updated. Internal memos circulated reminding officers, power doesn't always wear a uniform. Authority doesn't always arrive in expected packaging. And while the headlines faded, one image remained: a black woman standing silently at the steps of justice, not because she lacked power, but because she chose to reveal where it was broken. Because sometimes true justice begins not inside the courtroom, but at its very doorstep.